The first thing I remember about that Monday is the smell of old books and the way the late September sun cut through the library windows like a blade of warm gold. I was sitting at my usual corner desk on the third floor, working through a problem set for advanced computational theory, when my phone buzzed, then it buzzed again. Then it started vibrating so continuously it nearly walked itself off the edge of the desk. I flipped it over. The screen was a wall of notifications, social media tags, messages from numbers I hadn't spoken to in years, emails with subject lines that all contained some variation of, "Is this you?" And at the center of it all, a single post from an account I recognized immediately, my sister Ella's account. She had posted a photo of me. It was a candid shot, taken through the library window from outside. I was looking down at a book, my head propped on one hand, the sunlight doing something annoyingly dramatic to my profile. Ella had a good eye. I had to give her that. But it was the caption that made my jaw tighten. Looking for the girl brave enough to melt this iceberg. My brother says even the ice goddess of Westwood U isn't good enough for him. Prove him wrong. I stared at the screen for a solid 10 seconds. Then I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly through my nose, and allowed myself one silent promise. I was going to murder my sister, legally, with kindness, by freezing every single one of her credit cards. The post had been live for 43 minutes. It had over 900 comments and had been shared to every student forum, group chat, an anonymous gossip page Westwood University possessed, and Westwood possessed a lot of gossip pages. I didn't need to read the comments to know what they were saying. To the student body, I was Lucas Gray, the quiet engineering student who wore unbranded hoodies, ate alone in the dining hall, rode a secondhand bicycle, and lived in a cramped apartment off campus that had a water heater with the temperament of a retired opera singer. I was nobody, background noise, a face you might recognize from a group project but couldn't name, and now my sister had painted a target on that face and hung it in the town square. I rubbed my temples. The worst part was, I knew exactly why she had done it. Ella was 18, a freshman, and pathologically convinced that her older brother was going to die alone surrounded by circuit boards and cold coffee. She had been dropping hints about putting myself out there for months. I had ignored her. This was her nuclear option. I looked at the photo again. Then I looked at the caption again. Then I said, very quietly, "Ella, you have no idea what you just started. The dining hall at noon is a battlefield disguised as a cafeteria." I walked in at 12:15, my tray in hand, and felt the shift immediately. Conversations dipped, heads turned. Someone at a table near the salad bar actually nudged their friend and pointed. I kept walking. I was hungry, and the burger special looked decent. I had just sat down at my usual table, a small two-seater wedge between a pillar and the window, when the doors at the far end of the hall swung open with more force than necessary. Damian Sterling walked in like he was entering a coliseum. He was flanked by his usual entourage, two guys from the business school who laughed at everything he said, and a girl named Tessa who functioned as his personal hype woman. Damian himself was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a blazer that probably cost more than most students' tuition for a semester. His family owned Sterling Retail Group, a chain of department stores that had been bleeding market share for years but still had enough cash to keep Damian in Italian leather and misplaced confidence. He scanned the room, found me, and his face split into a grin that had absolutely no warmth in it. "There he is," Damian announced, loud enough for half the dining hall to hear. "The man of the hour, the iceberg slayer himself." His entourage laughed. A few other students snickered. I took a bite of my burger. Damian sauntered over to my table. He didn't sit. He stood directly across from me, planted both hands on the tabletop, and leaned in. "Lucas, right, Lucas Gray." He said my name like it was a joke he was about to tell. "I'm going to do you a favor, man. I'm going to give you a chance to fix this before it gets embarrassing for everyone." I chewed, swallowed, and took a sip of water. "Fix what?" "The post." He gestured vaguely toward his phone. "The little stunt your sister pulled on the confession wall. The one where she claimed you said Valentina Frost isn't good enough for you." He laughed, and it was the kind of laugh designed to make other people laugh along. "Now, I know you didn't actually say that, because if you had, that would make you either delusional or suicidal. So here's the deal." He reached into his blazer and pulled out a thick envelope. He dropped it on the table next to my tray. It landed with a solid thump. "There's $5,000 in there, cash. All you have to do is go online, Post a statement saying the whole thing was a joke. Your sister made it up, and you apologize for any disrespect toward Valentina. Simple, clean, everyone moves on. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at Damien. $5,000. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on my burger. $5,000 wouldn't cover the coffee budget for my legal team in a single afternoon. I had signed off on a $600 million acquisition last Thursday, while sitting in the exact same chair I was sitting in now, eating the exact same burger special. The only difference was that Damien Sterling had no idea, and he wasn't going to find out today, because the whole point of being at Westwood was to be nobody, to give Ella a normal college experience, to keep my head down until the ghosts of my parents' world stopped circling. I'm going to give you some advice instead, I said, picking up my burger again. Your car is parked in the fire lane outside the north entrance. The silver S-Class, right? Custom rims, illegal tint on the front windows. Damien's grin flickered. What about it? Campus security does their rounds at 12:20. It's 12:18 now. If you leave right now, you might make it before they call the tow truck. The silence that followed was strange. Damien's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief. Then something sharper. He opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I watched the color drain from his cheeks. It was a notification from the campus security app. His car had been reported. The tow truck was en route. He snatched the envelope off the table and pointed a finger at me. This isn't over. You think you're clever. You're nothing, a nobody, and I'm going to make sure everyone on this campus remembers it. He stormed off, his entourage scrambling after him. The dining hall buzzed with whispered speculation. I finished my burger in peace. I was reaching for my water when the air in the room changed. It's hard to describe. It was like the temperature dropped by 2 degrees, or the ambient noise found a new, lower frequency. I looked up. Valentina Frost was standing at the entrance to the dining hall. She was exactly the way people described her. Silver blonde hair that fell past her shoulders in a straight, perfect curtain, eyes the color of pale ice. Skin so fair it seemed to refract light rather than absorb it. She wore a simple white blouse and dark trousers, but she wore them the way a queen wears a crown, like they existed to serve her, not the other way around. The Ice Goddess. I had heard the nickname at least 100 times since enrolling. I had seen her across lecture halls, at campus events. Once at a charity gala where I had been representing Gray Holdings in a private capacity, and she had been on the arm of her father. She hadn't noticed me then. I had made sure of it. She noticed me now. Valentina's gaze swept the dining hall, found my table, and locked on. She began walking toward me. The crowd parted for her without her asking. Even the servers behind the counter stopped what they were doing to watch. She reached my table. She didn't sit. She stood exactly where Damien had stood minutes earlier, but her presence filled the space in an entirely different way. Where Damien had pushed, she simply occupied. Lucas. Gray, she said. Her voice was cool, measured, every syllable placed with precision. The post on the confession wall. The one from your sister. I'm aware of it. I said. She claimed you said I wasn't good enough for you. I leaned back in my chair. She claimed a lot of things. She also once claimed she saw a UFO over the football field. Turned out to be a weather balloon. A muscle near Valentina's jaw tightened. Not anger. Something closer to surprise. Quickly suppressed. People didn't usually talk to her this way. They stammered. They over-explained. They did anything to keep her attention on them for one more second. I just sat there, waiting for her to get to the point. Did you say it? She asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. I studied her face. I had been reading people since I was 16 years old, sitting across boardroom tables from men 3 times my age who wanted to eat me alive. I knew how to spot a mask, and Valentina Frost was wearing one of the best I had ever seen. Polished, flawless, impenetrable, but underneath it, I caught something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. Real, genuine, hungry curiosity. If I said it, I replied. What would you do? She was silent for a moment. Then, very slowly, the corner of her mouth curved upward. It wasn't a smile. It was the suggestion of a smile, the ghost of one, there and gone in half a breath. If you said it, she said, I would think you were either very stupid or very interesting, and you don't strike me as stupid. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small card, cream-colored paper, minimalist design, a phone number printed in silver foil. She placed it on the table, exactly where Damien's envelope had been. This is my private number. I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere less crowded. Call me. She turned and walked away before I could respond. The dining hall erupted into noise the second the door closed behind her. I looked at the card. Then I looked at the ceiling, where a flickering fluorescent light had been annoying me for weeks. I made a mental note to have someone from facilities finally fix it. Or maybe I'd just buy the university a new building and put my name on the lighting system. Either way, my phone buzzed. A text from Ella. OMG, OMG, did Ice Queen actually talk to you? I saw a video already. You're welcome. I typed back. We need to talk. Your credit cards. Bring tissues. She responded with a string of crying emojis. I pocketed the card, picked up my tray, and walked out of the dining hall. Outside, the tow truck was just pulling away with Damien's S-Class on the back. He was standing on the curb, phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of an overripe tomato. He spotted me and shouted something I couldn't hear over the sound of my own complete indifference. I had a class in 20 minutes. I had a conference call with my CFO in an hour. And I had a feeling that Valentina Frost's card was going to burn a hole in my pocket until I did something about it. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the cramped, water heater-challenged one, and stared at the silver-embossed card on my coffee table, Valentina Frost. I had done my research over the past hour, the kind of research that went beyond social media and into the databases my team maintained. Frost Properties was a legitimate operation, built over 3 generations. Her father, Arthur Frost, was known for being ruthless but clean. No major scandals, no pending litigation. Valentina herself had a spotless academic record, a minor in piano performance, and a reputation on campus that seemed to have built itself without her active participation. She wasn't a threat. She was, by all available metrics, exactly what she appeared to be, a wealthy, intelligent, intensely private young woman who had been challenged in public for the first time in her life and didn't know what to do with the feeling, which made her dangerous in a completely different way. Because I didn't date. I didn't do relationships. I had spent the last 5 years building an empire in the shadows, raising my sister, and ensuring that the people responsible for my parents' death never got close enough to finish the job. Romance was a variable I couldn't control, and I controlled everything. But that card kept catching the lamplight, and I kept looking at it. My phone rang. It was Marcus, my chief of staff and the person who had kept my life from imploding at least 47 times in the past year. I saw the post, Marcus said without preamble. Ella's handiwork, obviously. And the Frost girl gave you her number in front of half the campus. You have cameras in the dining hall now. I have cameras everywhere. Lucas, it's why you pay me. There was a pause. What do you want to do? I picked up the card. I want you to run a deeper background on the Frost family, not the standard package. I want to know if there's any connection between Arthur Frost and the people who came after my parents. You think there might be? I think it's unlikely, but I don't believe in coincidences. A girl like that doesn't just walk into my life the same week my sister decides to play matchmaker on a public forum. Noted. I'll have the report by morning. Another pause. And Lucas, you're 21 years old. You're allowed to take a personal interest in someone. Good night, Marcus. I hung up before he could say anything else. He was right. Of course, he was always right. It was infuriating. I looked at the card one more time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. I was beginning to think you'd thrown it away, Valentina said. Her voice was different on the phone, still cool, but with an undertone I hadn't heard in person. Relief, maybe, or anticipation. I considered it, I said. The paper quality saved you. I'm particular about recycling. A pause, then a soft sound that might have been a laugh, quickly stifled. You're not like anyone else on this campus. Are you? Neither are you. That's why you gave me your number. Among other reasons, she let the words hang. There's a coffee shop on Maple and 4th, the one that stays open until midnight. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. I'll answer your questions if you answer mine. What makes you think I have questions? Because you're the kind of person who needs to understand things before he engages with them. And you don't understand me yet. That's going to bother you until you do. She was good. I had to admit it. 8 o'clock. I said, don't be late. I'm never late, Lucas Gray. She hung up. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling again. The flickering fluorescent light in my apartment chose that moment to buzz aggressively. I made another mental note. By the building. Replace every light fixture. Start with my own. Somewhere across campus, I knew Damian Sterling was nursing his wounded ego and his impounded car, planning his next move. He would come at me again. People like him always did, and I would deal with him the same way I dealt with everyone who mistook my silence for weakness, with precision, with patience, and with the full weight of an empire they didn't know existed. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had a different kind of variable to prepare for, one with ice blue eyes and a smile she only showed to people who earned it, and against every logical instinct I possessed, I was looking forward to it. Maple Street at 7:50 in the evening is the kind of quiet that doesn't belong to a university town. The coffee shop sat on the corner of 4th, a narrow brick building wedged between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique. Warm lights spilled from its windows onto the damp sidewalk. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A couple of graduate students hunched over laptops, an old man reading a newspaper by the window, and a barista who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I arrived at 7:52. Valentina was already there. She had chosen a table in the back corner, positioned so she could see both the front entrance and the emergency exit. It was the kind of seating choice a CEO's daughter learned to make before she learned to drive. She was wearing a light gray sweater tonight instead of the formal white blouse. Her silver hair pulled back in a loose knot. A cup of something untouched sat in front of her. "You're late," she said as I sat down. "I'm 2 minutes late. You said 8. I said 8, and I expected you to be early." It's what I would have done. I signaled the barista for a black coffee. "Then we've established our first difference. You try to exceed expectations. I try to meet them exactly. Less effort, same result." That almost smile flickered at the corner of her mouth again. "Is that your philosophy of life? Minimal effort." "It's my philosophy of punctuality. My philosophy of life is more complicated." "I'm sure it is." She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands on the table. "So, here we are, the man who allegedly thinks I'm not good enough for him, sitting across from me in a coffee shop. This is either the beginning of a very interesting friendship or a very elaborate suicide note. Could be both. Could be." She tilted her head. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone nervous. Someone who would apologize for the post before I even asked. Someone who would spend the whole evening trying to impress me." She paused. "You've done none of those things. You haven't even complimented my sweater." "It's a nice sweater. It's a $4,000 cashmere blend. Then it should compliment itself." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. It wasn't a polite, socialite laugh, the kind designed to make the other person feel clever. It was a real one, short and surprised, like she had forgotten she was capable of making the sound and was startled to hear it come out of her own mouth. "You're very strange, Lucas Gray." "I've been told." "By whom?" "Mostly by people who wanted something from me and didn't get it." My coffee arrived. I took a sip. It was terrible, which was perfect. Terrible coffee kept a place authentic. The moment a coffee shop started serving good coffee near a university, it turned into a study hall and lost all its character. "I have questions," Valentina said. "You mentioned that on the phone. I want to know who you are, not your major, not your hometown, not the sanitized version you give to classmates. I want to know who you actually are." She met my eyes. "Because I've been trying to figure it out for 3 days, and every answer I find just leads to more questions." I set down my cup. "You've been investigating me." "Naturally." "And what did you find?" "Nothing." She said the word like it personally offended her. "Your records are clean. Almost too clean. Orphaned at 16. Legal guardian of your younger sister. Moved here 2 years ago from out of state. Excellent grades. No disciplinary record. No social media presence. Your financial aid paperwork is in order. Your landlord says you pay rent on time. You've never been arrested. Never been in the news. Never done anything that would make anyone look twice. Sounds like you found plenty." "I found the outline of a person, not the person." She leaned back. "No one is this unremarkable unless they're trying very hard to be. So either you're in witness protection, or you're hiding something, or you're the most boring human being on the planet. And you don't strike me as boring. What if I'm just a private person?" "A private person doesn't look at Damian Sterling the way you looked at him in the dining hall." I raised an eyebrow. "And how was that?" "Like he was a mosquito you were deciding whether to swat or ignore." "Most people on this campus either fear Damian or want to be him." You looked at him like he was a minor inconvenience. She paused. Also, you somehow knew his car was about to be towed, down to the minute. That's not luck. That's either surveillance or access to information most students don't have. She was sharp, sharper than I had given her credit for. I made a mental adjustment to my assessment of Valentina Frost. She wasn't just a rich girl with good cheekbones and a famous last name. She was observant, analytical, and clearly not used to being denied answers. All right, I said. You've asked your questions. Now I get to ask mine. That was the agreement. Why did you really give me your number? And don't say it's because you were curious about the confession post. You could have satisfied that curiosity with a 5-minute conversation in the dining hall. You didn't need to give me private access. Valentina was quiet for a moment. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger, and I saw the first genuine crack in her composure. A hesitation so brief most people would have missed it. Because you weren't looking at me, she said finally. Excuse me, in the dining hall. When I walked in, every other person in that room was staring at me. The men were staring because they wanted something. The women were staring because they were comparing themselves. Even Damien, when he's pretending to claim me, is really just looking at his own reflection. She lifted her gaze. You looked at me like I was a variable in an equation you hadn't solved yet. No hunger, no fear, no desperation, just assessment. And that interested you. It infuriated me, she corrected, at first, and then it interested me, because I realized I've spent 4 years building walls to keep people out, and you were the first person who looked at those walls and didn't even bother trying to climb them. You just noted their existence and moved on. I understood then. It was something I recognized because I had seen it in myself. In the years after my parents died, isolation wasn't always a defense mechanism. Sometimes it was a test, a way of asking, without asking, whether anyone cared enough to try. So you gave me your number because I ignored you. I gave you my number because you treated me like a person instead of a prize. She said it simply, without self-pity. That's rare. I wanted to see if it was real. I took another sip of terrible coffee. Is it living up to your expectations? I haven't decided yet. Ask your next question. We talked for 2 more hours. The graduate students packed up and left. The old man with the newspaper fell asleep in his chair. The barista started wiping down counters with the aggressive energy of someone who wanted to close early, and still we talked. Our conversation moving from surface to depth in a way that felt less like an interview and more like a chess match, where both players kept discovering new pieces on the board. I learned that Valentina had been playing piano since she was 4, that she had a younger brother with autism who was the only person she admitted to loving unconditionally, and that she had turned down a recording contract at 17 because her father needed her to learn the family business instead. She spoke about it without bitterness, but I recognized the weight in her voice. It was the same weight I carried, the knowledge that duty had stolen years from us that we would never get back. In return, I told her things I hadn't planned to tell anyone, not the big secrets, not Gray Holdings, not the real reason my parents died, not the network of shell companies and contingency plans I had built in the shadows, but smaller things, real things, that I had raised. My sister alone since I was 18, that I didn't sleep well, that I sometimes walked the campus at 3 in the morning because the silence helped me think. Why 3 in the morning? She asked. Because at 3 in the morning, no one expects anything from you. The world stops making demands. You can just exist for a few hours without being anyone's boss or guardian or enemy. Valentina nodded slowly. I do the same thing, except I play piano. The practice rooms in the music building are unlocked all night. I've been playing there at 2 in the morning since freshman year. Maybe I've heard you. My apartment isn't far from the music building. If you've heard me, you've never mentioned it. I assumed it was a ghost, a very talented, slightly melancholy ghost. She smiled. A real smile this time, not the half-suppressed one. It transformed her face completely, melting the ice into something warm and unexpectedly vulnerable. You're very strange, Lucas Gray, you already said. That, it bears repeating. At 10:45, the barista finally kicked us out. We stood on the sidewalk under a street lamp, the autumn air cold enough to see our breath. Valentina had her hands in her pockets, her shoulders slightly hunched against the chill. This was unexpected, she said. Which part? All of it. I came here expecting to solve a mystery. Instead, I found a bigger one. She looked at me. I'm not done trying to figure you out. I'd be disappointed if you were. She laughed again, softer this time. Good night, Lucas. Good night, Valentina. She walked to her car. A silver Maserati that probably cost more than the coffee shop's annual revenue, and drove away. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment after her taillights disappeared, thinking about what she had said. I found a bigger mystery. I had been called many things in my life. Genius, orphan, CO, threat. Nobody had ever called me a mystery before, and I found, to my mild irritation, that I liked it. The next morning, Damian Sterling made his next move. I was in my advanced computational theory lecture when the trouble started. The course was taught by Professor Hendricks, a tenured faculty member who had been at Westwood for 30 years and had clearly stopped caring about 25 of them. He was a decent lecturer when he bothered to prepare, but most days he just read from slides that had been written before I was born. Today, however, he seemed unusually alert. He called on me halfway through the lecture to answer a question about algorithmic complexity, a question that was several orders of magnitude more difficult than anything we had covered in the course so far. It was the kind of question you'd find in a doctoral dissertation, not a third-year undergraduate class. I answered it anyway, correctly. In detail, Professor Hendricks's expression flickered. He hadn't expected that. He tried again with a follow-up question that was even harder. I answered that one too, adding a brief note about a recent paper that had proposed an alternative solution. The class was dead silent. A few students were openly staring. That's adequate, Hendricks said, his voice tight. Though I notice your methodology resembles a paper published last month in the Journal of Advanced Computing, I hope you're not passing off others' work as your own, Mr. Gray. The accusation landed in the room like a dropped glass. I felt the attention of 40 students shift onto me, some curious, some hostile, some just grateful they weren't the target. I'm not, I said. No. Then perhaps you can explain how a third-year student arrived at a solution that took a team of PhD researchers 6 months to develop. I leaned back in my chair. I had been expecting something like this, not this exact scenario, but something. Damian's pattern was predictable. When direct confrontation failed, he moved to indirect sabotage. By a professor, planned evidence, used the system as a weapon. Actually, Professor, I can explain. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and found the confirmation I had been waiting for since last week. 3 months ago, I submitted a paper to the Journal of Advanced Computing under a private research grant. The paper was peer-reviewed, accepted, and published in last month's issue. I'm the sole author. If you check the journal's author database, you'll find my credentials on file. I turned my phone so he could see the acceptance letter. It was on official journal letterhead, complete with the editor's signature and the publication date. The methodology doesn't resemble the published paper. Professor, the methodology is the published paper because I wrote it. The silence that followed was the kind that makes other silences feel noisy. Professor Hendricks's face went through an impressive spectrum of colors. Red, white, then a sickly gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Why wasn't I informed of this? Because it wasn't relevant to the course material. Until you decided to make it relevant, which raises an interesting question. I put my phone away. Who told you to ask me those specific questions? Because they weren't on your prepared slides. You had to write them down on a note card. I can see it from here. Every student in the lecture hall turned to look at Hendricks's lectern. There, tucked beside his laptop, was a white index card covered in handwritten notes. Even from the third row, I could see that the handwriting wasn't his. It was too neat, too deliberate. Hendricks snatched the card off the lectern and shoved it into his pocket. His hands were shaking. You're out of line, Mr. Gray. We'll discuss this in my office after. I don't think we will. I think we'll discuss it with the Academic Integrity Committee instead. I've already forwarded them a copy of the complaint I filed this morning. I stood up, gathered my things, and looked at him with the same expression I had used on Damian in the dining hall. Mild, patient, utterly unthreatened. They'll be very interested to know who gave you that card, and how much they paid you to try to publicly discredit a student. I walked out of the lecture hall. No one tried to stop me. Behind me, the room erupted. The cafeteria at noon was becoming a recurring stage for public confrontations, and I was starting to feel like an unwilling actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I was sitting at my usual table, eating a turkey sandwich, when Damian appeared. He didn't have his entourage this time. He didn't have an envelope of cash. He just stood there, vibrating with barely contained rage, his fists clenched at his sides. Hendricks resigned this morning. He said, "The committee opened an investigation. They're tracing the payment." "I know. I was CC'd on the email." "How?" The word came out strangled. "How are you doing this? You're nobody. You live in a rat hole apartment. You ride a bicycle. My father has people on the board of trustees. I have resources. You have nothing. So how are you winning?" I put down my sandwich. I looked at Damian Sterling, really looked at him. He was 22 years old, heir to a failing retail empire, and he had never been told no in his life. He wasn't evil. He was just a product of a system that had convinced him his money made him invincible. And now that system was crumbling around him, and he had no idea why. "Damian," I said, "do you know how Sterling Retail Group's stock performed last quarter?" He blinked. "What? Your family's company, the source of all your resources. It closed yesterday at $11.42 per share, down from $28 at the start of the year. Your father has been taking out loans against the company's real estate holdings to keep the stock price from collapsing entirely. 3 of your largest suppliers have stopped extending credit, and your CFO resigned 2 weeks ago, citing personal reasons, though the real reason is that he saw the quarterly projections and didn't want his signature on them." Damian's face had gone completely white. "How do you?" "That's confidential." I'm not finished." I leaned forward. "Next week, your father is going to announce a restructuring plan. It will involve closing 40% of your retail locations and laying off 1,200 employees. The stock will drop below $5. Your family's personal wealth, which is almost entirely tied up in company shares, will lose roughly 85% of its value overnight." "You're lying." "I'm not. I've seen the spreadsheets. Your father's been hiding the truth from you because he's ashamed. He built an empire, and he's watching it crumble. And you're here, on a university campus, trying to impress a girl who will never look at you twice, using money your family doesn't have anymore." I picked up my sandwich and took a bite. Damian just stood there, frozen. "The envelope with $5,000, I said. "That wasn't a bribe. That was desperation. You can't afford to throw that kind of money around anymore. Can you? But you did it anyway, because you thought intimidating me would somehow fix everything else in your life." Damian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Here's my advice," I said. "Go home. Talk to your father. Ask him to show you the real books, not the ones they show the investors. And then decide whether you want to spend what's left of your family's fortune on vendettas against people who don't care about you." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me like I had grown a second head. I stood up, took my tray, and walked away. When I glanced back from the exit, Damian was still standing in the same spot, but his hands were no longer clenched. They hung limp at his sides. That night, I met my sister for dinner. Ella had chosen a small Italian place near campus, the kind of restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. It was the same place our parents used to take us when we were kids, on the rare occasions when they were home and not flying across the world for meetings. The nostalgia was intentional on Ella's part. She always picked this place when she knew she was in trouble. "I ordered garlic bread," she said as I sat down. "And the thing with the cheese, and tiramisu. Basically all your favorites." "How much did all that cost?" $60. She winced, "Which I can't actually afford right now because someone froze my credit cards." "Someone sounds very responsible." Ella slumped in her chair. She was wearing an oversized sweater and had her hair in a messy bun. Without makeup, she looked about 14, which made it harder to stay annoyed at her. But I managed. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the post, for all of it. I thought it would be funny. I thought it would help you meet someone. I didn't know Damian was going to go nuclear over it." "Damian's reaction isn't your fault. He was looking for an excuse to cause trouble. You just handed him one." "But I handed it to him." She picked at a breadstick. "I keep doing that, don't I? Making messes and expecting you to clean them up." "Ella." "No. Let me finish. I've been thinking about this all week." She looked up at me, and her eyes were red. "You gave up everything for me. You were 18. You should have been going to parties and making mistakes and figuring out your life. Instead, you were raising me. And I never even said thank you. I just kept taking and assuming you'd always be there to fix things." "Ella," I reached across the table and took her hand. "I didn't give up anything. I made a choice. You're my sister. There was never a version of my life where I didn't take care of you. But I made it harder. The confession post, the way I spent money without thinking, the way I never asked if you were okay. A tear slid down her cheek. Are you okay? Lucas. Actually okay. It was a question no one had asked me in 5 years. Not Marcus, who was paid to handle my problems, not my lawyers, who were paid to protect my assets, not any of the business partners who shook my hand and called me a prodigy without knowing I was still a teenager playing a man's game. Most days, I said, some days are harder than others. Ella nodded. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Okay, then I'm going to be better. I'm going to help instead of making things worse. I already started. I blocked Damien's number, and I deleted all his messages, and I told my roommate to stop accepting his gifts. That's a good start. And I got a job. I blinked. You what? At the library, circulation desk, 12 hours a week. It's not much, but it covers my coffee habit. She managed a wobbly smile. You're not the only gray who can work hard. I didn't know what to say. Ella, who had never held a job in her life, who had never had to worry about money because I had always made sure she didn't, had gone out and found work on her own. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, but I wanted to. I wanted to prove to you that I'm not just your little sister who causes problems. I'm your partner, or at least, I want to be. The garlic bread arrived. I used it as an excuse to compose myself. When I looked up again, Ella was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What? I asked. I heard about what happened in Hendrix's class, and in the cafeteria with Damien. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone talks about everything on this campus. It's exhausting. People are saying you're not who they thought you were, that there's something more. I took a bite of garlic bread and didn't answer. Lucas, Ella said quietly. Who are you really? I thought about Valentina, sitting across from me in the coffee shop, asking the same question. I thought about Damien, frozen in the cafeteria, realizing his entire world was built on sand. I thought about the encryption key in my phone that controlled 17 shell companies, 3 offshore accounts, and a trust fund large enough to buy Westwood University 3 times over. And then I looked at my sister, who had just gotten her first job because she wanted to prove she could stand beside me instead of behind me. I'll tell you, I said, but not tonight. Tonight, we're just going to eat pasta and talk about normal things, deal? Ella hesitated. Then she nodded. Deal, but soon, I promise. We ordered dinner. We talked about her classes and my impossible problem sets and the raccoon that had taken up residence in the dumpster behind her dorm for one evening. We were just a brother and sister having Italian food, the way we used to when our parents were still alive and the world hadn't yet shown us how sharp its edges could be. It was the best meal I'd had in years. Later that night, I was in my apartment reviewing the latest report from Marcus when my phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number that I had already memorized. The music building practice rooms are cold. At 2 a.m., bring coffee if you're still awake. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put on my jacket, stopped at the 24-hour convenience store for 2 cups of terrible coffee, and walked toward the music building. Some variables were worth the risk. The night was cold, the stars were out, and somewhere in the distance, a piano was waiting. The music building at 2 in the morning is a different country. During the day, it's a factory of sound, pianos clashing from every practice room, vocal students doing scales in the stairwells, the percussion wing vibrating through the floorboards like a constant minor earthquake. But at night, when the building is technically closed and only the practice room lights bleed under locked doors, it becomes something else entirely, a museum of silence, interrupted only by the ghosts of musicians who couldn't sleep. I found Valentina in room 204, the one with the Steinway grand that the university reserved for graduate recitals and visiting artists. She had propped the door open with a music theory textbook, an invitation, or maybe a dare. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old sheet music. She was playing something I didn't recognize, slow, minor key, a melody that kept threatening to resolve into something hopeful and then deliberately choosing not to. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers moved across the keys with the kind of muscle memory that comes from thousands of hours of practice. She didn't look like the ice goddess of Westwood University. She looked like a girl who had been playing piano alone at night since she was old enough to reach the pedals. Waiting for someone to walk through the door, I waited until the piece ended before I spoke. That wasn't Chopin. Valentina's hand stilled on the keys. She didn't turn around. It's mine. I've been working on it for 2 years. It still doesn't have an ending. Maybe it's not supposed to. Some things don't resolve neatly. She turned then, and I saw that. Her eyes were slightly red. She had been crying. Not recently, but sometime in the past few hours. The traces were faint, expertly concealed, but I had spent years learning to read faces the way other people read balance sheets. You actually came, she said. I brought coffee. It's terrible. I'm consistent. I handed her one of the cups from the convenience store. She took it, her fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. Her skin was cold. The practice rooms were always freezing at night. The heating system shut down after midnight to save money. A budget decision made by people who had never needed a place to escape to at 2 in the morning. You've been crying, I said. It wasn't a question. Valentina wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. My father called tonight. He found out I've been investigating you. He told me to stop. What did you tell him? That I wouldn't. That you were interesting. That I wanted to know more. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. He didn't take it well. He never does when I disobey him. That's why he sent me here. You know, Westwood. Not because of the music program or the business school, because it's far enough from our home that I can't interfere with his operations, but close enough that he can still control me. She set the coffee down on the piano's music rack, a move that would have given the music department chair a heart attack, and shifted on the bench to face me more directly. I've spent my whole life being controlled, Lucas, by my father, by expectations, by the image everyone has of me. The ice goddess, the untouchable heiress, the perfect daughter. She said the words like they tasted bitter. Do you know what it's like to be looked at by everyone and seen by no one? I sat down on the bench beside her. There wasn't much room. Our shoulders were almost touching. I know exactly what that's like, I said. I've been invisible on this campus for 2 years, not because I wanted to be ignored, because I wanted to be seen by the right people and overlooked by the wrong ones. There's a difference. And which am I, right or wrong? I haven't decided yet. She turned her head to look at me. In the dim light of the practice room, her eyes weren't ice at all. They were the color of a winter sky just before dawn. Pale, yes, but with something warmer waiting just beneath the surface. You're very careful with your answers, she said. I'm very careful with everything. It's kept me alive. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't meant to say that. Not so directly. But something about this room, this hour, this girl with her unfinished composition and her red-rimmed eyes, had loosened a valve I usually kept tightly sealed. Alive, Valentina repeated. That's an interesting word choice. Most people would say successful, or safe, or comfortable. You said alive, like there was a real chance you might not have been. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She was smart enough to fill in the blanks. Your parents, she said quietly. They died when you were 16. The official report said it was a plane crash, mechanical failure over the Atlantic. You've done your research. I told you. I've been investigating. She paused. The report didn't add up. There were inconsistencies. The maintenance logs had been altered. The investigators noted unexplained anomalies in the wreckage, and then, 6 months later, the case was closed. No further comment. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. I had read that same report 100 times. I had the inconsistencies memorized. I had spent 2 years and a significant portion of my fortune tracing those anomalies back to their source, and I still didn't have the full picture. My parents didn't die in an accident, I said. They were murdered by people who wanted their company, their patents, their influence, people who are still out there, still powerful, still watching. That's why I'm here. That's why I keep my head down, not because I'm afraid of them, because I'm waiting for the right moment to destroy them. Valentina didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked or frightened or any of the things a normal person would look when a near stranger confessed to a long-term revenge plot in a darkened practice room. Instead, she nodded slowly. That's what I thought, she said. That's what I hoped. You hoped. I hoped you were someone who understood, someone who had been through something real, something that left scars, because I'm tired of being surrounded by people whose biggest problem is a B+ on a midterm. She looked down at the piano keys. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer, but it wasn't just cancer. It was stress. It was years of my father pushing her, using her, treating her like a prop in his political ambitions. She was a concert pianist before she married him. She played at Carnegie Hall when she was 19. By the time she was 40, she couldn't even look at a piano without crying. She pressed a single key, middle C. The note hung in the cold air, pure and lonely. That's why I play at night, when no one's listening. Because during the day, when I play for professors or at recitals or at the charity events my father makes me attend, I can feel her watching me, judging me, wondering why I'm wasting the gift she gave up. Maybe she's not judging you, I said. Maybe she's just listening. Valentina's composure cracked, just slightly. A tremor in her lower lip, a rapid blink. Then she did something completely unexpected. She leaned sideways and rested her head on my shoulder. I went still. I wasn't used to being touched. I avoided handshakes when I could, kept physical distance in conversations, built invisible walls around my personal space that most people instinctively respected. But Valentina had just walked through those walls like they weren't even there. "You're warm," she murmured. "I didn't expect you to be warm." "I'm not usually. I know. That's why this matters." We sat like that for a long moment. The coffee grew cold. The piano waited. Somewhere down the hall, a pipe knocked in the wall, the old building settling into its bones. Then, very quietly, Valentina began to cry. She didn't sob or shake or make any of the dramatic sounds people make when they want to be comforted. She just let tears roll down her cheeks and soak into the shoulder of my jacket, her breath coming in slow, measured exhales, like she had been holding this in for years and had finally found a safe place to let it out. I didn't say anything. I didn't tell her it would be okay, or that she was strong, or any of the empty platitudes people offer when they don't know what else to do. I just sat there and let her cry, because I understood. Sometimes the only thing you can give a person is the space to fall apart without judgment. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Her face was blotchy. Her nose was red. She looked nothing like the ice goddess. She looked human. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't invite you here for this. I just wanted to talk." "I wanted to." She shook her head. "I don't know what I wanted." "You wanted to be seen by someone who wasn't looking at your reflection." She stared at me. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment." It's infuriating. I've had a lot of practice reading people. It's part of my job. Your job? She sat up straighter. You keep hinting at things, your job. Your resources, the way you made Professor Hendricks resign. The way you talked to Damien in the cafeteria. People are saying you listed his family's financial problems in detail, like you had their accounting spreadsheets memorized. I did have their accounting spreadsheets memorized. I read them last month. Last month? Why would you have sterling retail groups? She stopped. Her eyes widened. The acquisition. There's been a rumor on the financial news about a mystery buyer acquiring distressed retail assets. They've been calling it the ghost portfolio because no one can trace who's behind it. My father mentioned it at dinner last week. He said whoever it was had bought up 17 regional chains in the past 18 months without anyone noticing. I didn't confirm or deny. I just waited. "Oh my God," Valentina breathed. "It's you. You're the ghost." "I prefer Lucas. It's less theatrical." "But you're 21. You're a student. You ride a bicycle. You live in that horrible apartment with the water heater that sounds like a dying opera singer." "Yes, I'm aware. How? How is that possible?" I stood up from the piano bench. I walked to the window and looked out at the darkened campus. The street lamps cast pools of yellow light on the empty walkways. Everything was still. Everything was quiet. It was the kind of night when secrets felt safe to tell. My parents didn't just leave me with grief when they died, I said. They left me with a company, Gray Holdings. You won't have heard of it. We don't operate under that name publicly. We use shell companies. Subsidiaries, blind trusts. My father built it that way on purpose. He always said visibility was a liability. If your enemies don't know what you own, they don't know where to strike. But your enemies struck anyway. Yes, because they found out. Someone inside our organization sold us out. I still don't know who. I turned back to face her. After the funeral, when the lawyers read the will, I found out that my father had been preparing me for this since I was a child. Every conversation we ever had about business, every lesson he taught me about negotiation and strategy and reading people, it was all training. He knew something might happen to him. He wanted me to be ready. And were you ready? No. I was 16. I was a child. But I didn't have the luxury of staying a child. So I grew up. Fast. I leaned against the windowsill. By 18, I had restructured the entire company, fired the executives I suspected of disloyalty, moved all our assets into a web of holding. Companies so complex that even the IRS struggles to untangle it. By 20, I was one of the wealthiest people in the country, and no one knew my name. But you came here, to Westwood. Why? Two reasons. One, Ella. She needed stability, a normal life. She didn't know about any of this. She still doesn't. Not fully. I wanted her to have at least a few years of being a regular college student before she had to carry the weight of what our family really is. And the second reason, I paused. I'm still looking for the people who killed my parents, and I'm getting close. One of the leads I'm following connects to someone with ties to this university. I don't know who yet, but when I find them, I want to be close enough to look them in the eye. Valentina was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked over to me. She stopped when she was close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and cold, like winter flowers. My father, she said. Arthur Frost, do you think he's involved? I don't know. I've investigated him. He's clean, as far as I can tell, but clean in our world often just means good at hiding things. If he is involved, if he had something to do with what happened to your parents, you'll have to make a choice between your family and the truth. I met her eyes. But that's a bridge we don't have to cross tonight. Tonight, we're just two people in a music room, drinking terrible coffee and telling secrets. She searched my face for something. I wasn't sure what. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. No more heavy questions tonight. But Lucas, yes. Thank you for coming, for the coffee, for all of it. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in years. I didn't realize how much I needed it until right now. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were still cold, but her grip was steady. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at her face. Valentina, don't say anything. Don't analyze it. Don't figure out the angles, she smiled. And it was the same real smile I had seen outside the coffee shop. Just stand here for a minute. We can go back to being careful tomorrow. So I did. I stood in a freezing practice room at 2:30 in the morning, holding hands with the ice goddess of Westwood University, and I didn't think about shell companies or stock prices or the men who had murdered my parents for 1 minute, maybe 2. I was just a 21-year-old man, and she was just a girl who played piano when she couldn't sleep. The world would still be there in the morning. The secrets, the lies, the revenge I had been planning for 5 years. But right now, in this room, none of it mattered. Outside the window, the first snow of the season began to fall. The next week passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. Classes continued. Assignments piled up. The campus gossip machine churned through its usual cycles of scandals and rumors. But something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Damian Sterling was noticeably absent from campus. His usual table in the dining hall sat empty. His entourage had dispersed, the hangers-on drifting away like leaves after a storm. I heard from Marcus that Sterling Retail Group's board had called an emergency meeting. Damian's father was facing a vote of no confidence. The empire was crumbling, and Damian was crumbling with it. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing at all. Damian was a symptom, not the disease. He was a spoiled child who had never been told no, and now reality was collecting its debt with interest. He would either learn from this and become a better person, or he wouldn't. Either way, he was no longer my concern. Valentina and I had fallen into a pattern. We didn't discuss it or define it or do any of the things that normal couples did. But every night, around 2 in the morning, my phone would buzz with a text. Sometimes just a single word, sometimes a question, sometimes nothing but a piano emoji. And every night, I would walk to the music building and find her in room 204, working on her unfinished composition. I didn't always stay long. Some nights I just sat in the corner and listened while she played. Other nights we talked about nothing. Movies we hadn't seen, books we had pretended to read, the absurdities of university bureaucracy. We were careful not to touch the heavy topics again. We were both, I think, afraid of what would happen if we went deeper, but the carefulness couldn't last forever. I knew that. She knew that. We were both people who had built our lives on control, and control was a dam that could only hold back so much pressure before it cracked. The crack came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the library, working on a problem set I had been ignoring for days, when my phone rang. It was Marcus. He never called during the day unless something was wrong. I found something, he said, his voice tight. Something you need to see. Tell me. Not over the phone. I'm sending a car. It's about Frost Properties. My blood went cold. Arthur Frost. No. His business partner, a man named Victor Hale. He's been with Frost Properties for 30 years. He was also on the board of your father's company. Before the crash, the world tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk. Marcus, tell me everything. I'll brief you in person. But Lucas, there's more. Victor Hale has a son. He goes to Westwood. He's been on campus this whole time, and you've walked past him at least twice a week. For the past 2 years. Who? His name is Nathan Hale. He's a fourth-year business major, and according to my sources, he's been funneling information about you to his father since the day you enrolled. The library was silent. The sun was still streaming through the windows. Somewhere in the stacks, a student laughed at something on their phone, but in my head, all I could hear was the sound of a piano, playing an unfinished melody in the dark. Send the car, I said. I'll be waiting. The car Marcus sent was a black sedan with diplomatic plates and a driver who didn't ask questions. I sat in the back, staring at my phone, reading and rereading the encrypted file Marcus had pushed to my secure server. Victor Hale, board member of my father's company, business partner of Arthur Frost, father of a student I had passed in the hallways for 2 years without knowing he was watching me. The pieces were falling into place with a kind of terrible precision. I had always suspected that. The betrayal came from inside my father's inner circle. The plane crash had been too clean. The investigation shut down too quickly. Someone with access to the company's internal systems had given the killers everything they needed. Flight plans, security protocols, the names of the personnel who could be bribed or threatened. I had spent 5 years looking for that someone. And now Marcus was telling me he had been hiding in plain sight, attached to the Frost family like a parasite. But there was a question I couldn't answer yet. Did Arthur Frost know? Was Valentina's father complicit in the murder of my parents? Or was Victor Hale operating independently, using Frost Properties as cover for his own crimes? If Arthur knew, then Valentina was the daughter of the man who helped kill my family. If he didn't, then she was as much a victim of Hale's deception as I was. I wouldn't know which was true until I had more information, and I wouldn't make any judgments about Arthur, about Valentina, about anyone, until I had proof. The sedan pulled up to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of building that didn't appear on any corporate registry, with no signage, no directory, and security that wouldn't look out of place at a government intelligence facility. Gray Holdings maintained 6 such locations across the country. This one was my primary operations hub. Marcus was waiting in the conference room on the 3rd floor. He was a lean man, in his early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 20 years in military intelligence before deciding the private sector paid better. He had been my father's most trusted advisor before the crash. Afterward, he had become mine. You look terrible, he said as I walked in. When did you last sleep? Define sleep. That's what I thought. He gestured to a chair and pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the conference table. Victor Hale, 62 years old, joined your father's company as chief operating officer 12 years ago. Left the company 6 months before the crash, officially for personal reasons. 3 months after the crash, he surfaced at Frost Properties as a senior partner. He's been Arthur Frost's right hand ever since. The display showed a timeline of Hale's career, complete with photographs, financial records, and a web of connections that stretched across half a dozen shell companies. Why did he leave my father's company? I asked. Officially, health issues, stress-related. The paperwork is very clean. Marcus tapped the display, and a series of red lines appeared, connecting various dots. Unofficially, someone inside the company was leaking information to a rival consortium. Your father was closing in on the source when the crash happened. I think Hale was the leak. I think he got spooked, got out before your father could prove it, and then made sure your father never got the chance. And the rival consortium, still unidentified. Whoever they are, they're very good at staying hidden. But Hale has been quietly moving money to offshore accounts linked to known shell companies for years, small amounts, carefully disguised. It looks like payment for ongoing services. Services like what? Surveillance, information gathering, keeping tabs on anyone who might be a threat. Marcus pulled up a photograph. A young man with dark hair and a familiar face. Nathan Hale, Victor's son. He enrolled at Westwood 2 months before you did. I studied the photograph. I recognized the face. I had seen it in lecture halls, in the library, at campus events. He was one of those students who existed at the periphery of every social circle without ever being the center of attention. Unremarkable, forgettable, the perfect spy. He's been reporting on you, Marcus continued. Your schedule, your habits, who you talk to, who you avoid. His father has been compiling a file on you since the day you arrived on campus. Does Nathan know why? Does he know what his father did? I don't think so. Based on his communications, he believes he's helping his father with a corporate security assessment. He thinks you're a potential business rival, not the son of the man his father helped murder. I leaned back in my chair. The holographic display rotated slowly, casting blue light across the conference room. Victor Hale, Nathan Hale, Arthur Frost, Valentina. The web was tightening, and I was at the center of it. What about Arthur Frost? I asked. How deep is he in this? Marcus hesitated. It was a tiny pause, barely perceptible, but I caught it. Marcus, there's no evidence that Arthur Frost was involved in the crash. No payments, no communications, nothing that connects him to the rival consortium. He paused again. But Victor Hale has been his business partner for 12 years. They've built Frost Properties together. Arthur trusts him implicitly, if Hale was part of the conspiracy. It's hard to believe Arthur didn't know something, but not impossible. No, not impossible. Hale could have been playing both sides, using Frost Properties as cover while running his own operation in the shadows. I thought about Valentina, the way she had cried in the music room, the way she had talked about her father with a mixture of love and resentment, the way she had looked at me when she asked if Arthur might be involved. If he is involved, you'll have to make a choice between your family and the truth. I had told her we didn't have to cross that bridge yet, but the bridge was rushing toward us faster than I had anticipated. I need proof, I said. Hard evidence. Something that definitively ties Victor Hale to the crash, and I need to know whether Arthur Frost was involved or not. I won't act until I have the full picture. I'm already working on it. But Lucas, Marcus leaned forward. Nathan Hale is still on campus. He's still watching you. And if he realizes you're onto him, he'll warn his father. Victor Hale has the resources to disappear. We need to move carefully. I know. I've been careful for 5 years. I can be careful a little longer. That evening, I walked into the campus library and found Nathan Hale sitting at a computer terminal near the entrance. He was a slim young man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of unremarkable features that made him easy to overlook. He glanced up as I walked past, and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I smiled at him, a polite, impersonal smile, the smile of one stranger acknowledging another. He smiled back, the same smile, perfectly mirrored. I walked on, found a desk in the back corner, and opened my laptop. My pulse was steady, my hands were still, but inside my head, a clock had started ticking. Victor Hale had been watching me for 2 years through his son. He had files on my schedule, my habits, my relationships. He knew about Ella. He knew about Valentina. He knew, or thought he knew, everything about me, but he didn't know that I knew about him. And that information asymmetry was the most valuable weapon I had. I pulled up the secure messaging app on my phone and sent a message to Marcus. Begin phase 2. I want full surveillance on Nathan Hale. Every call, every email, every person he talks to, and start digging into Arthur Frost's personal finances. If there's a connection to the rival consortium, I want to find it. Marcus's reply came within seconds. Understood. I'll have a preliminary report within 72 hours. And Lucas, be careful with the Frost girl. If her father is involved, she could be a liability. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed my response. She's not a liability. She's a person. Treat her accordingly. I closed the app and went back to my problem set. But my mind wasn't on computational theory. It was on a piano in room 204 and the girl who played it, and the impossible choice I might have to ask her to make. The end of the week brought the Founders Gala. It was the biggest event on Westwood's social calendar, a black-tie affair held in the university's grand ballroom, attended by trustees, major donors, faculty, and a select group of students. Invitations were highly coveted. Attendance was mandatory for anyone who wanted to be seen as someone. I had received an invitation every year since I enrolled. I had never attended. The attention was the opposite of what I wanted, but this year was different. This year, Damian Sterling was hosting a pre-gala party at his family's off-campus estate, and he had made sure everyone knew that Lucas Gray was not invited. The exclusion was meant to be a humiliation. It was meant to remind me of my place. Instead, it gave me exactly the opening I needed, because while Damian was hosting his party and the university elite were sipping champagne in the grand ballroom, I would be somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that mattered. The day of the gala, I woke up to three things. The first was a text from Valentina. My father wants me to attend the gala tonight. He's bringing Victor Hale. I don't have a choice. I wish I could see you instead. The second was an encrypted file from Marcus. Subject line: Phase 2 preliminary. Urgent. I opened it and read it twice. Then I read it a third time because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The third was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Ella standing in the hallway, holding a garment bag and looking like she was about to cry. "Before you say anything," she said, "I know I'm supposed to be studying, and I know you don't want to go to the stupid gala, but I found this in Mom's closet when I was home last month, and I had it altered to fit you, and I thought maybe, just maybe, you could wear it tonight and show everyone who you really are." She unzipped the garment bag. Inside was a tuxedo. Not just any tuxedo, my father's tuxedo. The one he had worn to every board meeting, every awards ceremony, every event where he needed to remind the world that Gray Holdings was a force to be reckoned with. I touched the fabric, Italian wool, hand-stitched. The lining was silk, and embroidered on the inside pocket were my father's initials. A.G. Alexander Gray. "Ella, I know you've been hiding," she said, her voice trembling. "I know there are things you haven't told me. Big things, scary things, but I'm not a kid anymore. Lucas, I can handle it. And whatever's going on, whatever you're facing, I want to be standing next to you, not behind you." I looked at my sister, 18 years old, a job at the library, credit cards frozen, and still she was here, holding our father's tuxedo, asking me to stop protecting her and start trusting her. "Okay," I said, "I'll tell you everything. But first, we're going to a party." "A party? But Damian's party is off campus, and you weren't invited." "I'm not talking about Damian's party." I took the garment bag and hung it on the door frame. "Get dressed, something formal. We have somewhere more important to be." The Westwood Founders Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Student Center, a century-old building with marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and a ceiling painted with scenes from the university's history. By the time Ella and I arrived, the event was in full swing. Black-tied waiters circulated with trays of champagne. A string quartet played in the corner. The university's most powerful and influential figures mingled in clusters there. Laughter carrying across the marble floor. Ella clutched my arm. "Lucas, are you sure about this? Everyone's staring." "Let them stare." I had worn my father's tuxedo. It fit perfectly. The tailors Ella had found had done their job well. I had also worn something else, the calm, steady confidence of a man who had spent 5 years building an empire in the shadows, and who was finally ready to step into the light. We walked through the crowd, and the reactions rippled outward in waves. Students who had ignored me for 2 years did double takes. Professors who had dismissed me as unremarkable suddenly found reasons to look twice. The whispers started, "Is that Lucas Gray?" and spread like fire through dry grass. Valentina was standing near the center of the room, her arm linked with her father's. Arthur Frost was a tall man with silver hair and the same ice-blue eyes as his daughter. Beside him, slightly apart from the main group, stood Victor Hale. He was shorter than I expected, with a round face and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. When he saw me, the smile flickered, just for an instant, but I saw it. So did he. He knew I had seen it. "Mr. Gray," Arthur Frost said as I approached. His voice was polished, diplomatic. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Arthur Frost. This is my business partner, Victor Hale. And you already know my daughter, I understand." "We've met," I said. I shook Arthur's hand, then turned to Victor Hale. "Mr. Hale, it's a pleasure. I've heard so much about you." Victor's smile reattached itself. "All good things, I hope." "Informative things." I held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "In fact, I was hoping to speak with you privately. There's a matter of some importance I'd like to discuss." "Business here," Victor laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Surely it can wait until Monday." "I don't think it can." I reached into my jacket and withdrew a folded document. It was a printout of one of the files Marcus had sent me that morning. This is a record of payments made from an offshore account linked to you, to a shell company that we've traced back to the consortium responsible for my parents' deaths. There's more where this came from: bank records, email correspondence, testimony from a former employee who saw you accessing restricted flight information 3 days before the crash. The color drained from Victor's face. Arthur Frost took a step forward. What is this? What are you accusing him of? I'm accusing him of conspiracy to commit murder, I said, my voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. The murder of Alexander and Helena Gray, my parents, 12 years ago. Victor Hale sold them out to a rival consortium. He provided the information that allowed them to sabotage my father's plane. And then he covered it up by joining your company, Mr. Frost, and using your resources to hide his tracks. You're insane, Victor hissed. This is slander. I'll have my lawyers. Your lawyers are already aware. In fact, they've been served with a federal subpoena. As of 20 minutes ago, the FBI's White-Collar Crimes Division is investigating your financial activities. They have everything they need. Victor Hale stared at me. The mask was gone now. Underneath was something ugly and desperate. He took a step back, then another, and then he turned and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. 2 men in dark suits were waiting for him at the door. They weren't FBI agents. They were my security team. I had arranged for them to be there in case. Victor tried to run. Mr. Frost, I said, turning back to Arthur. He looked shell-shocked, his face ashen. I don't believe you were involved in my parents' deaths. The evidence doesn't support it. But you trusted a man who was, and that trust allowed him to operate under your protection for over a decade. I suggest you review your internal security protocols. And I suggest you ask yourself why you never questioned where Victor Hale came from or what he might have done before he joined your company. Arthur Frost opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Beside him, Valentina was perfectly still. Her eyes were fixed on me. The expression on her face wasn't shock or horror or betrayal. It was something I hadn't expected. It was relief. He was your partner, she said quietly to her father. All those years, all those board meetings, all those business trips. And you never once asked about his past. Valentina, I told you Lucas was different. I told you he was investigating something. You told me to stay away from him. She pulled her arm free of her father's grip. But he was right. He was right about everything. She walked past her father and stood beside me. Not behind me, beside me. I'm sorry, she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. For what my family's negligence cost you. For what Victor Hale did while hiding under our name. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know that I believe you. And I'm on your side. The ballroom was absolutely silent. The string quartet had stopped playing. Every eye in the room was on us. Then, from somewhere near the back of the crowd, someone started clapping. It was Ella, my sister, standing on a chair, clapping her hands together with tears streaming down her face. That's my brother, she shouted. That's Lucas Gray, and he is the most incredible person you will ever meet. One by one, others joined in. The applause spread through the ballroom like a wave, building until it was a roar. I stood in the center of it, Valentina on one side and Ella on the other, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. I felt whole. Later that night, after the FBI had taken Victor Hale into custody, after the gala had ended and the guests had dispersed, I sat on the steps outside the ballroom with Valentina beside me. The stars were out, cold and clear, and somewhere in the distance a church bell was tolling midnight. My father didn't know, Valentina said. About Hale, about your parents, I believe him. He's not a bad man. Lucas, he's just willfully blind. He trusts the wrong people because it's easier than questioning them. I know. That's why I didn't go after him. Would you have? If he had been involved? I thought about it. Yes, but I'm glad I didn't have to. She leaned her head on my shoulder. It was becoming a habit, and I was becoming less and less interested in resisting it. Victor Hale was just one piece, I said. The rival consortium is still out there. The people who actually gave the order. I'm going to find them. I know you will. She lifted her head and looked at me. And when you do, I want to help. Not because I feel guilty, because I want to be part of something that matters, with someone who matters. I reached out and tucked a strand of silver hair behind her ear. The gesture felt natural in a way that surprised me. Valentina, I said. I've spent 5 years being alone, pushing people away, keeping secrets. I'm not sure I know how to do anything else. Then learn. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm asking you to try. The church bell tolled again. Midnight, the start of a new day. Okay, I said. I'll try. She smiled. That real smile. The one that transformed her entire face. Then she leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, brief, barely more than a whisper of contact. But it was enough. More than enough. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. For the record, she said. That was not part of any plan. I know. Good. Just checking. She laid her head back on my shoulder, and we sat there in the quiet, watching the stars whirl slowly overhead. Inside the ballroom, the cleaning crew was stacking chairs and sweeping confetti. In the administration building, the FBI was processing Victor Hale's arrest, and in my apartment, Ella was probably refreshing social media obsessively, waiting for updates. But for now, in this moment, I let it all go. The revenge, the secrets, the careful walls I had built around myself. Tomorrow, I would resume the hunt for the people who killed my parents. Tomorrow, I would deal with the fallout of tonight's revelations. Tomorrow, I would be Lucas Gray, CEO of Gray Holdings, the ghost in the machine. Tonight, I was just a man sitting on marble steps with a girl who played piano at 2 in the morning. And for the first time in 5 years, that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. The message was short and cryptic. The archive has been watching. You, Lucas Gray, your file has been updated. Expect contact. There was no signature, no identifying information, just an icon, a stylized eye, identical to the one that appeared in the corner of certain documents I had found among my father's papers years ago. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Marcus with a single instruction: find out who sent this. The game was bigger than I had realized, and it was just getting started, the days after the Founders Gala passed. In a blur of legal proceedings, media inquiries, and the quiet satisfaction of watching Victor Hale's empire crumble, his arrest made national news. The FBI's investigation expanded to include 3 other former executives from my father's company. The rival consortium that had ordered my parents' deaths was still out there. But for the first time in 5 years, I had them on the defensive. The campus, meanwhile, had transformed into a completely different ecosystem. I couldn't walk across the quad without being noticed. Students who had ignored me for 2 years suddenly wanted to be my friend. Professors who had dismissed me as unremarkable now greeted me by name. The library staff had started reserving my usual desk, which was both flattering and slightly unsettling. But the most dramatic change was in Ella. 2 days after the gala, she had shown up at my apartment with a notebook full of questions. Real questions about Gray Holdings, about our parents, about the people who killed them. She had been doing research, real research, not just browsing Wikipedia, and she wanted answers. I gave them to her, all of them. It took 6 hours, 3 pots of coffee, and one very tearful breakdown when she finally understood the full scope of what our parents had built and what had been taken from us. But at the end of it, she was different, stronger, more serious. She was still my little sister, still the girl who could make me laugh with a single ridiculous text. But something had shifted. She had grown up in the space of a single afternoon. I want to help, she said. Not just support you from the sidelines. I want to actually help. So I gave her a job, an official one, with a salary and responsibilities, and a very patient supervisor in Marcus's office who would teach her the basics of corporate intelligence. It was entry-level work, mostly data entry and research summaries. But she threw herself into it with the same enthusiasm she used to reserve for shopping sprees and social media drama. Your sister has a natural talent for pattern recognition, Marcus told me over the phone. She spotted a connection between 2 shell companies that my analysts missed. I'm both impressed and slightly annoyed. That's the Gray family trait. We're very annoying. She also wants to learn self-defense. She asked me to recommend an instructor. I paused. She asked you, not me. She said you'd worry too much. She wanted to present it as a done deal. That was Ella, always finding new ways to surprise me. The date of the Westwood Music Festival arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made the campus look like a postcard. The festival was an annual tradition, an all-day event held in the outdoor amphitheater at the center of campus, featuring student bands, visiting artists, and the kind of overpriced food trucks that university administrations love to approve. By noon, the amphitheater was packed with students, faculty, and a surprising number of local residents who treated the festival as a community event. I had been planning to skip it. The attention from the gala was still intense, and I wasn't in the mood for another public spectacle. But Valentina was performing. She had been asked to play a solo piano piece during the evening showcase, and she had spent the past week in a state of barely controlled anxiety about it. "You'll be there, right?" she had asked the night before, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Of course. Promise me. Even if something explodes or the stock market crashes or Marcus calls with an emergency, promise me you'll be there." "I promise." So I was there. I found a spot near the back of the amphitheater, far enough from the crowd to breathe, but close enough to see the stage. Ella was somewhere in the front rows with her friends, having secured seats hours in advance. Marcus had sent a security team in plain clothes, but they were positioned at the perimeter, invisible and unobtrusive. The afternoon performances were pleasant but unremarkable. Student bands played covers of popular songs. The University Jazz Ensemble did a spirited rendition of something complicated and probably very impressive to people who understood jazz. The food trucks ran out of tacos by 3 o'clock, which caused more outrage than any campus controversy in recent memory. But as the sun began to set and the stage lights came on, the atmosphere shifted. The showcase was about to begin. The showcase that Damian Sterling had been planning to disrupt. I had known about his plan for a week. Marcus's surveillance team had intercepted his communications. The media contacts he had bribed, the hacked footage he planned to display, the carefully edited evidence of supposed business fraud he was going to project onto the giant screens flanking the stage. It was the same playbook he had tried to use at the gala, but more desperate, more reckless. He was a drowning man reaching for anything that might keep him afloat. He didn't know that I had replaced his footage with something else entirely. He didn't know that the media contacts he had bribed had already been contacted by my legal team. He didn't know that the FBI, still working on the Hale case, had taken an interest in the Sterling family's financial irregularities. He was about to find out. The MC, a senior from the theater department with an aggressively cheerful stage presence, bounded onto the stage as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Good evening, Westwood. Are you ready for our showcase performances?" The crowd roared. The MC grinned. "We have an incredible lineup for you tonight. But first, a word from one of our festival sponsors, the Sterling Retail Group." The giant screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. And then, instead of the promotional video that Damian had prepared, something else began to play. It was a recording, a phone call between Damian and his father, dated 3 days ago. The audio was crisp, the voices unmistakable. "We're finished," Damian's father was saying. "The board voted this morning. We're being removed. The company is being sold for parts. Everything I built, gone. This is Lucas Gray's fault." Damian's voice was shaking with rage. It's not his fault. It's ours. We've been hiding losses for 3 years. The loans, the shell companies, the tax evasion. It was all going to come out eventually. Gray just sped up the timeline. I don't care about the timeline. I want him destroyed. I want his face on every screen on campus with the word fraud under it. I don't care if it's real or not. I want him to suffer. The recording cut off. The screens went black. Then they lit up again with a series of documents. Financial records, loan agreements, internal audits that showed years of systematic fraud within Sterling Retail Group, tax evasion, money laundering, bribes to local officials. All of it documented, time-stamped, and stamped with the seal of the federal prosecutor's office. The amphitheater was deathly quiet. The MC stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his microphone dangling from his hand. And at the back of the crowd, near the VIP section, Damian Sterling had gone completely white. He turned to run, but 2 men in dark suits were already blocking his path. They weren't campus security. They were federal agents. "Damian Sterling," one of them said, his voice carrying across the silent amphitheater. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and attempted defamation. You have the right to remain silent." Damian didn't remain silent. He started screaming. Not words, just a raw, animal sound of rage and terror and complete, absolute disbelief. He screamed as they put the handcuffs on him. He screamed as they led him past the crowd, past the students who had once feared him, past the faculty who had enabled him, past everything he had ever thought he was entitled to. His father was arrested and, hour later, at their family estate, the news would report the next morning that Sterling Retail Group had filed for bankruptcy. The stores would close, the jobs would disappear. The Sterling name would become a cautionary tale whispered in business school ethics classes for years to come. I watched it all from the back of the amphitheater. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet sense of completion. Damien had been a minor character in a much larger story, but his chapter was finished. Now, the MC, to his credit, recovered quickly. He stepped back onto the stage, his cheerful demeanor only slightly shaken, and said, "Well, that was certainly unexpected, but the show must go on, and our next performer is someone I know you're all very excited to see. Please welcome to the stage, Valentina Frost." The crowd's attention shifted, the screens went dark, then lit up with a simple image, a Steinway grand piano against a black background, and the words Valentina Frost, original, composition. Valentina walked onto the stage. She was wearing a simple white dress that shimmered under the stage lights. Her silver hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked calm, composed, every inch the ice goddess. But I knew her well enough now to see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremble in her hands as she sat down at the piano. She didn't announce her piece. She didn't look at the crowd. She just placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and began to play. It was the piece from Room 204, the unfinished composition she had been working on for 2 years, the melody that kept threatening to resolve into something hopeful and then deliberately choosing not to. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, as the piece progressed, something shifted. The minor keys began to give way to major ones. The tension began to release. The melody started, tentatively at first, to find its resolution. And then, in the final moments of the piece, she played a passage I had never heard before. It was the ending, the missing ending, the resolution she had been searching for in all those late-night practice sessions, all those hours of staring at the keys as if they held answers she couldn't quite reach. It was beautiful. It was hopeful. It was, unmistakably, a love song. The final chord hung in the air, pure and perfect. The crowd was silent for 3 full seconds. Then they erupted. Valentina stood up from the piano. She was breathing hard, her cheeks flushed. She walked to the front of the stage, and the MC handed her his microphone. "That piece," she said, her voice carrying across the amphitheater, "is called Archive. I wrote it for someone who taught me that the past doesn't have to define us, that we can carry our scars without letting them become cages." She looked directly at me. Even from the back of the amphitheater, our eyes met. "Lucas Gray," she said, "you told me once that you've spent 5 years being alone, pushing people away, keeping secrets. You said you weren't sure you knew how to do anything else." The crowd stirred, heads turned, whispers spread. Everyone in the amphitheater knew who I was now. Everyone had seen the gala. Everyone had heard the rumors. "I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. You know how to be brave. You know how to be kind. You know how to make someone feel seen when the whole world has been looking right through them." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You said the ice goddess of Westwood wasn't good enough for you, and maybe the ice goddess wasn't. But I'm not her, not anymore. You helped me melt her." She took a deep breath. "So here I am, in front of the entire university, telling you what I should have told you weeks ago. I'm not here to challenge you. I'm not here to solve your mystery. I'm just here, for you, if you'll have me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I started walking. The crowd parted for me the way they had parted for Valentina. In the dining hall all those weeks ago, faces turned, phones came out. I didn't care. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the stage. Valentina was looking down at me. Her eyes were wet. Her hands were shaking. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "You're supposed to be the ice goddess," I said, loud enough for her to hear. "But you're terrible at being cold." She laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." I jumped onto the stage. It was probably against every rule the university had about student conduct and liability waivers. I didn't care. I walked across the stage to Valentina, and I took her face in my hands, and I kissed her. The crowd lost its collective mind. Later, I would see the videos that had been posted online, the reactions, the commentary, the memes. Someone had already edited the footage into a short film with dramatic music and slow-motion effects. The internet, as always, worked fast. But in that moment, on that stage, I wasn't thinking about any of it. I was thinking about a cold practice room at 2 in the morning, a piano that had waited years for its ending, a girl who had cried on my shoulder and told me I was warm, and the fact that, after 5 years of being alone, I wasn't anymore. The festival ended, the crowds dispersed, the food trucks packed up and drove away, and I found myself sitting on the same amphitheater steps where Valentina and I had sat after the gala, watching the stars come out one by one. She was beside me, her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine. "That was terrifying," she said. "I'm never doing anything that brave again. You played beautifully. The piece, not the speech. The speech was a disaster. I forgot half of what I wanted to say. You said enough." I turned my head and pressed a kiss to her hair. "More than enough." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What happens now? Now, we go back to normal, or whatever passes for normal in my life. I have classes, you have classes. Marcus will keep investigating the consortium. Ella will keep learning how to be a corporate intelligence analyst. And I will keep trying to figure out who sent me that message after the gala. The archive message. Yes, I don't know who they are or what they want, but I'm going to find out." Valentina lifted her head and looked at me. "You're not doing it alone. Remember." I remember. I squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Valentina. I've spent 5 years pushing people away because I thought it was safer, for me, for them. But I was wrong. You and Ella and Marcus. You're not liabilities, you're my team. And whoever is out there, whoever is watching us, they're going to find out that the Gray family doesn't fight alone anymore. Good." She laid her head back on my shoulder. "Because I'm not going anywhere either." We sat there in the quiet, watching the stars. The campus was settling down around us. The last of the festival cleanup crews packing up their equipment in the distance. The lights of the music building flickered. Someone was in the practice rooms, probably a student who couldn't sleep. Lucas. Yes. I finished the piece, the one I've been working on for 2 years. I finally figured out the ending. I noticed I couldn't have done it without you." She paused. "I mean that literally. I was stuck. I had been stuck for years, and then you walked into my life. And suddenly the music made sense again. I thought about that, about endings and beginnings and the strange ways they intertwined. Maybe that's what the archive message meant." I said, "About my file being updated. Maybe it's not just about what happened at the gala. Maybe it's about this, us. The ending you found, the ending we're building." That's very philosophical for a man who once told me his philosophy of life was minimal effort. Same result. I've evolved. She laughed. "I'm glad." We stayed on the steps until the cold became too much to bear. Then we walked back across campus, hand in hand, past the library where Ella had first posted my photo, past the dining hall where Damien had thrown his money on my table, past the coffee shop where Valentina and I had our first real conversation. When we reached her dorm, she kissed me goodnight. A soft kiss. A promise, not a performance. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "I'll be there." She smiled and disappeared through the door. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at her window. Then I turned and walked toward my apartment, the one with the dying water heater and the flickering fluorescent light. I would have to deal with both of those eventually, but not tonight. Tonight, I was going to sleep, and for the first time in 5 years, I was going to dream about something other than revenge. In my apartment, my phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. Another piece of the puzzle I didn't yet understand. The archive recognizes the union of Gray and Frost. Your files are now linked. The game is expanding. Be ready. Below the message was the same. Stylized eye. Watching, waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed a response. My first direct reply to whoever was on the other end of these messages. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "We are the archivists. We watch, we record, and when the time comes, we invite. Your invitation is being prepared. Finish what you started with the consortium. Then we will meet." I sat down on my bed and read the message again. Archivists, an organization that watched and recorded, an invitation that was being prepared, a game that was expanding. My father had never mentioned anything like this. But then, my father had kept many secrets, the shell companies, the hidden assets, The encrypted files that I was still decrypting 5 years after his death. Maybe the archivists were one of those secrets. Maybe they were something else entirely. Either way, they would have to wait. I had a consortium to dismantle. I had a company to run. I had a sister to mentor and a girlfriend to build a future with. The game was expanding. But then, so was I. I turned off my phone and lay back on my bed. Outside my window, the campus was quiet. The stars were still out. Somewhere across the quad, a piano was playing, and I knew without checking that it was an archived recording of a piece called Archive, performed by a girl with silver hair who had finally found her ending. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the hunt would resume. The consortium, the archivists, the unanswered. Questions that still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. But tonight, I was just Lucas Gray, student, brother, boyfriend, archive entry number unknown. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough.